D-Day and the Soul of France. I'm Roger Mummert, and this is theparisproject.net. Part 1. What happened here? A colossal event happened 80 years ago. It occurred just 10 years before I was born, but it was a central event in the lives of my parents. It was world-changing, this endeavor of daring, courage, and sacrifice. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. It was the largest air and sea invasion in history. 7,000 ships, 15,000 aircraft, 125,000 troops transported 120 miles over sea onto 50 miles of beach. Soldiers came from the U.S., England, Canada, and also Poland, Belgium, and France. And in one day, what's called the longest day, they established a beachhead and began to turn the tide against the tyranny and aggression of a Nazi Germany intent on world domination. As dawn broke on D-Day, the success of the operation was far from assured, but the cost of its failure was unthinkable. By the end of the day, the beachhead was established, and Allied troops were moving inland. D-Day was followed by D+1 and D+2 that turned into the 75 days of the Battle of Normandy, and for those 2.5 months, Normandy saw death and destruction. Green pastures were reduced to smoldering craters, roads were littered with rotting corpses of soldiers and livestock, entire towns were wiped off the map. The liberation of France and Western Europe had begun, but as the farmers and townspeople of Normandy bore witness, liberation was not a parade, but a killing field. Military casualties were horrific, some of the highest human losses in the entire war. But also, 17,000 to 20,000 innocent French civilians would die in the Battle of Normandy, mostly from Allied bombings. Many of them died as they laid in their beds or huddled in basements. Some fled to stone churches that offered some minimal sanctuary as bombs rained down. And in the end, several 100,000 civilians would be left without homes, farms, livelihoods, forced to rebuild their lives where little or nothing remained. In Normandy, the 4 years of German occupation had been bitter, but relatively uneventful. Now, and with a terrible fury, the war had come home to Normandy. Across France, many suffered in the 337 days from D-Day to German surrender. Perhaps no region bore the scars of war more deeply than Normandy. And many here ask, why here? Why us? Understanding this epic event requires that we re-examine the narratives that were embraced by our troops and civilians back home, narratives that over time have become mythic, narratives such as the Great Crusade and American exceptionalism. In France, narratives of the flame of resistance and eternal France. We need to look at these in a new light, especially as America and France continue to evolve in identity and destiny. I was privileged to visit Normandy recently, and from the start I was flooded with impressions and emotions. I experienced a crushing cognitive dissonance, beauty versus enormity. It's almost incomprehensible that such a bountiful countryside had been visited by such suffering and ruin. Normandy today, as it was before the war, is a prized dairyland, known for its butter, cheeses, cream. Cows and sheep graze in pastures. There are orchards of apples and pears from which cider is pressed and Calvados is distilled. And grains dance in the sun as the gentle sea breezes blow through the fields. Still, the traces of war are fresh. Fields are pockmarked from Allied carpet bombings. The bleached white German batteries and bunkers jut out of green fields. There are massive remnants of the daunting Atlantic Wall, where Germans wrote in reinforced concrete their narrative, a false narrative to be sure, that Europe was impenetrable from the West. And along the winding streets of Bayeux, shop windows are painted with signs, "Thank you, liberators!" Shopkeepers post photos of how the streets looked in 1944, jeeps full of soldiers and French girls kissing them. Today, people come here in great number and from all over. They make pilgrimage to Normandy. They look for meaning here, and they all want to talk about it, perhaps with a candor that escaped their fathers or uncles. I'm here, they say, because of what happened here. This should never be forgotten. Yes, what happened here? It's hard to process it all. You hit a wall trying to get your mind around the enormity of loss at every turn and with the extreme level of sacrifice that seems out of sync with our time. That hit the wall moment usually comes in a cemetery surrounded by endless white crosses and stars of David, the heart-wrenching inscriptions for sons and husbands who never would experience the full measure of their lives. Some graves are nameless, a soldier known only to God. You have to stop, take a moment, take it slowly. Try to keep processing all of what happened here.